This episode is long overdue. Today, we are talking about microdosing with psilocybin mushrooms. This was a topic requested by somebody and something I actually get a lot of questions about from my clients. So, we are going to dive into the world of microdosing from my clinical perspective and my personal perspective because I have a lot of personal experience with microdosing mushrooms. I will touch on macrodosing mushrooms and how all of those pieces come together. But if you've been curious about what microdosing can do for your health, this is a place to start. So it'll be a really good, grounded conversation that I'm excited to have. So I came to my office to record, and then I thought, something's missing. So I drove all the way back home to take some microdoses and then come back and film this episode because I thought, well, if I'm connected in with the mushrooms, I think I can do a much better, more magical, grounded episode and really get the essence through. And so I come back to my office and I kept meaning to record, but then I was like in such a productive wave that, 3 hours later, here we are. But before we jump into today's episode, I must shamelessly plug my new project. I have just launched the Path to Practitioner Potency Mentorship Community for you. If you are a practitioner of herbalism, this means you are in clinical practice, you want to be in clinical practice, or you use herbs on yourself and study the craft, this is for you. I made this for two reasons. One, people are asking me for mentorship, and this is what came to me as the best access point to help me put that out into the world. And two, because I care about making natural healing potent again. I think a lot of natural healing modalities have lost their teeth and their potency, and it's gone what I call soft. This is herbalism, this is Ayurveda, this is traditional Chinese medicine, this is even body workers and naturopaths and nutrition. For a myriad of reasons that we can talk about another day, the industry it's lost its teeth. That's all I can say. And so this is my gift to start bridging that gap and helping people be more confident in practicing effectively. Because there's a world of difference between taking an herb course, reading an herb book, and then actually making those things work for you in a real live setting. This community has monthly trainings, it has monthly live Q&As or case reviews. There's a message board to ask questions when you're stuck or you want to celebrate. You have community support, you have my support, and if you're in the community, you get access to opportunities for one-on-one mentorship with me, our Heal the Healer program, any guest master classes I do, and all the bonus material that I will be doing because I will give and pour into this community because my heart feels so lit up for doing this. So, founding members, that means our first 15 members to join, get a lifetime discount. That's right, a lifetime discount. If you say yes early, I am paying it forward to you for as long as this community is running, which I have an inkling will be a very long time. So if you're interested, the link to join the community is in the show notes. It's live. Our first trainings are scheduled on the calendar in June, and you can start using that message board immediately to ask questions, to gain insights, to tell me where you're blocked and what you need support with. Okay, back to the episode. Microdosing, psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, shrooms, whatever you want to call them, they are having a bit of a moment. So I want to anchor this conversation somewhere because I think that this is a problem creeping into plant medicine. I think plant medicine is really beneficial. I don't think it's for everybody. And I see a path where the plant medicine is losing its magic. It's losing its ability to connect with us in the way that it is so positioned to do. So this is interesting. There are over 200 species of psilocybin containing fungi on every continent except Antarctica. And that makes my mind think that these mushrooms are here for our use and our benefit, right? Like any place that humans live, these fungi are present to help shepherd us. I think they're guides, they're teachers. And the problem I see happening is like mushrooms are earthy. They are very, very earthy. They're grounding. They have this heavy energy. And they have such a connectedness to the natural world. That's their magic. They really have a gift for shifting us out of our perspectives and showing us a new perspective. So when I do like a macro trip, like more than a microdose, I'm taking mushrooms. I always think about it as like going into the upside down if you watch Stranger Things. Like you are in the same place, but your reality and your interpretation and the way that you're perceiving that space is different. And I actually think that mushrooms give us a truer perception on reality than reality itself, or what we think is reality. And when I'm on mushrooms, I start questioning. I start looking at the world differently. Things feel different. Things look different. My imagination is expanding. The way I think is expanding. And I start really looking at some of our modern human inventions like cars and just thinking, how strange. Humans look so weird in cars on mushrooms. I can't even begin to tell you. Like, it just really makes you start questioning, why are things the way they are? So let me anchor that back to my problem with plant medicine and where I see it going. So for many, many, many years, right? Like you would get mushrooms on the gray market, right? Like you're not going to a doctor for mushrooms. They're in nature. You find someone who grows them or cultivates them, and that's how you get mushrooms. Now, mushrooms are becoming institutionalized. And I think the more we institutionalize plant medicine, it's going to lose its beauty and its benefits. I see this happening with ayahuasca. I see this happening with mushrooms. I see this happening with a lot of herbs. This mix is happening where money is involved. We are putting these things in clinical settings, and the more we are removing them from nature and their natural setting, the less magical they're going to be in doing what we need them to do. Because mushrooms bring us back to ourselves. Mushrooms bring us back to nature. They interrupt the stuckness so many of us feel just in this paradigm that we've created for ourselves. But the more that mushrooms are extracted from the environment they were meant to be in, the more that they are cultivated and in white labs and being studied, I think they're going to start losing their magic. So anytime that you are looking for mushrooms, you're looking for someone to guide you, you're trying to sit in ceremony, with really any plant medicine, I want you to be really cognizant of what's the energy exchange? Because it's okay that there's a monetary energy exchange, but when you're paying exorbitant amounts of money that are disproportional to what you should be paying, like that experience is going to be colored by money first. And then the other thing I want you to pay attention to is who are you trusting to shepherd you? Who are you getting your plant medicine from? Who are you getting your plant information from? What's their intention and where are they coming from? Because this is true with herbs, but this is especially true with things like mushrooms. Those things matter. Those things matter more than you know. And there's been plenty of times where I've had a quote unquote good mushroom source and my vibe or feeling around that person shifted and I no longer felt comfortable using or buying their mushrooms. Really use this to tune in and ask and question and look for places that are going to hold the purity that mushrooms deserve to be held in, because they are so susceptible to outside forces. And again, just the way that we are kind of plucking them out of their environments and bringing them into this clinical, rigorous, like let's study them, let's test them, let's synthesize them. I believe they're going to start losing potency. And then the other thing I'm going to say is one of the first things I heard, and I can't remember if I heard this before I started doing mushrooms or like when I was just in my early stages dabbling, is I think it was Alan Watts who said this: when you get the message, hang up the phone. And that is rung true on such a deep resonant level for me. And I think that we have to listen to that. I think mushrooms are tools. They can be abused. They can take you higher. They can take you lower. And the more tuned in and paying attention you are, the better you will be able to use them as allies. So there have been plenty of times in my journey where mushrooms are a no for me. And I will get into my personal story and involvement with mushrooms in a minute. But to this day, I am not quote unquote welcome in mushroom world all of the time. And that's for my own good and my own protection, because at some point, mushrooms can shift. Mushrooms are not the end all be all, and they can't hold you. They can't hold the space that you want to be in. They can nudge you. They can, like I said, get you unstuck, but they can't set you free. And you can get stuck in that illusion. If you listen to any spiritual teachings of Ram Dass, I really like his discussions around mushrooms and usage. And I've found this to be true for my own personal experiences is I use them as a tool. I don't need them like I used to quote unquote need them. And I can achieve what mushrooms do for me differently now. I can get there from meditation. I can get there from being aware. I can get there from being in nature and um just different tools that are a little bit more longevity bearing is the best way I can say that. So I just want to set the tone straight because these are my beliefs and how I believe these tools should be honored. And I do think that mushrooms should be used with a lot of respect and intention. Hold on, I've been filming content all day. So I want to tell you a little bit about my personal experience, and then I will get into some of the more clinical sides of using mushrooms in practice. And yes, I know that's already contradicting myself because I said taking mushrooms in a clinical setting is ruining their magic, but I don't consider my clinical setting to be like the same as the clinical setting of your doctor. My journey with mushrooms began years ago, and I had heard they could help with anxiety and depression. And I had an interest. I had a fear and I had an interest because I grew up with my father telling me how dangerous psychedelics were. I heard stories of his friend tripping acid and he took too much and then they had to like chain him to his car because he couldn't stop seeing dead bodies. If you take LSD once, then it stays in your system and you could never get all these jobs because they're going to test you for it. And you could, go to crack your back one day and have a trip. I knew he used to do mushrooms, but he would just tell us these stories about they were just like loaded with fear around them. And I know that his intention was he didn't want his kids to do drugs, but he definitely colored them for me. And then you go into schools and you start learning about, drug awareness and alcohol awareness, and mushrooms are a class 1 substance, right? That means they are amongst the most dangerous substances out there, which is absolutely insane. But there's a lot of fear, confusion, misunderstanding about mushrooms that can definitely color perception. So that's kind of the purview I grew up with around mushrooms. And then I started having an interest as I heard things like they can help with anxiety and depression. And this was a part in my life where I wouldn't consider myself spiritual. I was not on this path yet. I was a different human being at that moment in my life. I cared about my job. I cared about money. I cared about my cars. I cared about the bathroom towels in my bathroom being perfect. I cared about bigger houses. And it just, I would say, I lived probably like a pretty standard American life, right? Like you work all day in your stressful job, you get money, you ask your boss for promotions, you come home, you watch TV, like all of the things that people struggle with, I did. And I felt myself in this groove, and I knew that there was something clawing inside me, just full of misery and unhappiness. And My story is not linear, so I'm going to try to keep this just to the mushroom parts for conciseness. But I remember somebody gave me some mushrooms at some point. They sat in my house for months, and then I finally, the first time I did it, I just took a little piece off of the mushrooms, and these are like the biggest mushrooms I've ever seen. Like they were in a jar, and they were just huge. Like we're not talking little golden teachers or anything. I don't actually remember what the variety was, but I took a piece, and it was probably more than like the standard microdose. And we'll talk about all that. We'll get into the specifics about microdosing and best practices and things like that. But I took a piece of this mushroom, and I was just spending the day at home cooking. And I remember for the first time, and what I can say probably was my entire life, I felt present. I felt present. I felt awareness. I just was so in the moment, and that's something I hadn't felt before. And I liked it. It was life-changing. That was a pivotal moment for me because I didn't even know what presence felt like until that moment. And I'm like, whoa, is this where we're supposed to be? Is this how we're supposed to live? It was almost confusing. It was such a new feeling. So that opened up the door to my mushroom experience. And in the beginning, I would microdose by just like tearing a piece off of a mushroom and using that intuitively. And then I started doing bigger doses. And, I remember one of my first big doses, I was at a home and there was a fire going in the fireplace. And I remember looking into the fire and seeing me as a little girl and just like all of the grief and sadness I held. And, like, it was like something in me snapped. And the person I was with, like, he looked at me and I was like, "Oh my god, he sees me." I felt seen for the first time, and, like, all of these things just started snapping inside of me, and it was like floods of just sadness and grief. But at the end of processing that was, like, this soft understanding and this, like, acknowledgement of, like, "I'm okay." And I've had good mushroom trips. I've had bad mushroom trips. I've learned a lot from my mushroom trips, and they have fundamentally changed the course of my entire life. After I started dabbling with mushrooms, I quit my job. I bummed around and I became a clinical herbalist. I actually got in touch with my heart and my soul and, you know, what sparks joy, and it's fundamentally changed my life in the most positive way. And I also remember this other trip I'm going to tell you about. And these aren't microdoses. These are macrodoses, so bigger amounts of mushrooms. My partner at the time and I were in Julian hiking, and we took the mushrooms. It was a Sunday, and I was working a really, really stressful job at the time. I was in software development management. I was probably the director of IT at this point. And I took my phone, but I specifically put it at the very bottom of my backpack. And part of my job back then was I was constantly on call. Like, if there was an emergency, I was the one they called. If there was an outage, if there was a problem, if something needed to be changed, I was literally tethered to my phone 24/7. If, I got a call at 3 a.m. that said systems down, I had to get my ass up, go wake up my developers in Romania, and get some shit moving. It was stressful. And that mushroom trip with my phone in my backpack was the first time I felt like I had a break away from that pressure. Like, it was gone. My job wasn't existent. There was so much like mental processing and again being present and just like my imagination going, and like my work wasn't weighing on me. And I came back from that mushroom trip dreading my life. Like, I was like, oh my God, I can't go back to work because I felt something and I want to keep feeling that something. And my job is not making me feel that way. And so after that mushroom trip, I knew I was done with that career. Like, I knew it was over, and it was just a matter of time of exiting gracefully, because I had the juxtaposition of the life I was living and the life I could be living. And while, life ebbs and flows, I have ups and downs, my life is so much closer to what I felt on that mushroom trip than it was when the weight of the world was on me and I was tethered to my phone and working a job that just made me so miserable, like so miserable. So it was a really pivotal experience, and I think that's what mushrooms are really great at, helping you see what's possible. So there's a metaphor that like mushrooms are like getting on an elevator, and they will take you to the top and they will show you what's possible. They will not keep you there though. And sometimes they'll drop you back off in the basement. And I feel like on that mushroom trip, I was dropped off back in the basement because I had to go face my life. And that's when I started making I'd already started making some serious changes, but that's when I like really started making some serious changes of this is misery. I am not living. I am surviving. I have money. I have nice things, but my soul is suffocating. So I extricated myself from that job, and I had a really funky couple year period where I was exiting from that job. I didn't know what was next. And that is when I started microdosing. It was during that period of my life. And through a series of events, I found a supplier. And this is my first experience microdosing other than like myself microdosing, which was pieces of mushrooms as I felt intuitively called. And this supplier, they were so cool. They were in St. George and they had like a gorgeous menu of all kinds of things, including mushrooms and microdoses. And they had just like a really cool starter guide, and you could ask them questions, and they really shaped my formative experiences. I bought my microdoses from them, and I knew nothing at this point. And those microdoses were 250 milligrams. So they were like big microdoses. They were on the very upper end of a microdose. And I'll talk more in a little bit about the microdosing, dosing protocols and things like that. But I would use these as I felt called. I never stuck to any of the standard protocols. And some days I would be really like off my rocker because the microdoses will magnify what you're feeling and bring it to the surface. Like you can't necessarily hide when you're on a microdose. And so, especially when you're doing a microdose that big. So, there's a couple days where I'm like, oh, I'm calling off work because the floor is moving. Or, whoa, I am going to spend the day just crying. This is like probably the beginning of me working on myself and understanding myself and who I am. And throughout the course of my journey, I historically struggle with anxiety and depression as lifelong patterns since I was a little kid. And I'm not going to say mushrooms were the only thing, but they were a thing that got me in touch with a different part of myself, that helped a different part of myself start leading, that helped me see the world differently and reassess priorities and what's actually important to me on the end of the day. They helped me get on this path to becoming a clinical herbalist, to sitting in my calling, to help guide people in their lives and their health, to help them get onto their higher life paths. Like mushrooms didn't give me gifts, but they helped me come back to myself so I could get in touch with these gifts. And I would not trade any of it for the world. I really wouldn't. I think microdosing has a huge potential to help people. I do think you're going to get better, more potent, quicker results if you do macrodosing, like bigger amounts of mushrooms with the microdosing. But for people that aren't ready or that's not calling to them, I think microdoses do a lot of really great stuff. And to be honest, I would love to use them more in clinical practice. I have so many clients where I'm like, oh God, I want to get you on some mushrooms. And I have a lot of clients that are on mushrooms and, doing microdosing. And it's so funny because they're always like, I have to tell you something and I don't know how you're going to take it, but like, what do you think of me microdosing? And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, yes, good. If there weren't any legal concerns, I probably would have recommended that myself. And it's funny that there's still it's moments like that that make me realize there's still such a stigma around mushrooms. And, some of the people that have told me they're on mushrooms were like worried about how I'd react because there is that stigma out there. And then they get relief because they're like, oh, you understand. And yes, I do. These are a great tool for those that they're a great tool for. So I wish I could use them more freely in clinical practice, but for legality reasons, I am very conscientious of who I recommend them for, who I use them for. I formulate my own microdoses for myself and my partner and my family. I've used them with some clients, but I don't lead with it. I lead with the other tools in my toolbox. And then if, that person comes along where I'm like, I undeniably can't not recommend this, or I feel enough trust that I will share my microdoses with them, then that will blossom and go that way. But I look forward to the day that I can more easily weave them into what I do, because I think they are great. So if you are here listening to this episode, chances are you're interested in microdosing, you know someone who's microdosing, you hear about it, you want to know if it's for you, you might be a little scared, you are probably feeling all kinds of things. First, I want to anchor on what are microdoses actually good for in clinical practice. The things I consider them good for, to be brought in for, are things like OCD, migraines and headaches, anxiety and depression. Those are probably the two biggest symptoms that lead people to mushrooms. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, because the standard modern treatments for anxiety and depression are just so failing people on such a fundamental level. Mushrooms are also great for neurodegeneration and things like dementia. Life-threatening illness. So people with big life-threatening diagnoses, think cancer, get a lot of anxiety around that. And rightfully so. Death is scary, and it really is a lot of things to confront when you do receive a diagnosis like that. Mushrooms can help with that life-threatening illness anxiety by like a huge reduction. We're talking like 60 to 80% reduction in anxiety around life-threatening illnesses, which is cool, like very cool. And I know a lot of people and practitioners that use mushrooms for end-of-life care. So if somebody is at the end of life and they're in a denial setting, or they're really struggling, or it's that fear and anxiety around it, mushrooms can help them make peace with the situation. They can really kind of, again, shift the paradigm, and I think make people feel a lot better about death, because they give us some answers and some support, and probably tune us into the universe in a way that really supports that specific end of life shift. They are also beneficial for helping people with addiction. Think alcohol, tobacco, opioids. And there's two places in clinical practice that I really like them. Yes, with the anxiety, yes, with the depression and everything else on the list. But when people are stuck, and that stuckness is on a deep rooted level, probably coming from trauma, mushrooms help create conditions where things shift. So sometimes people come to me and they want to feel better. They want to move through their symptoms. They want to do the protocols, but something in them is sabotaging, or they just don't have it in them to shift the patterns or the habits, or maybe they're even doing these things, but there's still this just thing holding them back, and they're also being held back in their lives. Mushrooms can shift the stuckness. And the other thing they can do, which is connected, is they can help with emotional processing. So emotions get stuck because we haven't been taught to process them, and they build up in our body and they manifest. They manifest as reactivity, or we can't control our emotions, or we just feel stuck because there's things actually stuck inside us. Mushrooms can help us start processing the emotions and moving things through, which is super cool and super useful, because we have a lot of people with a lot of grief around a lot of things in life. And when we can have a tool that can help move through grief, stuckness, bottled up emotions, it's amazing. And I would say it's definitely a component in most chronic illnesses, chronic diseases, chronic symptoms that is very overlooked. And I'm a big believer that anxiety and depression don't just happen in the mind. Talk therapy, in my opinion, is so limited in its potential. And if people are experiencing things like anxiety and depression, you need a holistic perspective. You need somebody who can hold the whole picture and help you shift out of it. I don't think talking about it, well, some talk therapy and processing is helpful, I don't think that it holds the answers to shifting people out of these cognitive patterns. And when most of our mental health care relies on talk therapy, there's no wonder that we are in a absolute mental health epidemic. And I see it. Like, people come to me on antidepressants, people come to me on anxiety medication or ADHD medication, or you name it, they're doing it. And I think we need a broader approach, because I've watched people come off their SSRIs with herbs. I've watched people come off their SSRIs with mushrooms. I've watched people fix their depression by understanding the connection between what's happening in their digestive system and their minds. And we need a more holistic approach to addressing these things. The success rate with medications like SSRIs is very low, and the risk is very high, in my opinion. And I think talk therapy really just, again, keeps people stuck in that loop. So mushrooms are a way to disrupt all of that. They are a way to knock you out of that groove and shift what's happening in your life. And your ability to make changes is just, whoa, increased exponentially, even with microdoses. Microdoses are enough to start shifting the paradigm. You will shift the paradigm quicker and more dramatically if you are doing bigger doses periodically and then using microdoses to integrate, but you can get just as far with microdoses. It just might be slower. I will also note that it's crazy to me that psilocybin mushrooms are a class 1 substance, because they have one of the lowest overall harm scores of any psychoactive substance or drug. Lower than alcohol, lower than tobacco, lower than cannabis, and lower than pharmaceuticals. Like, physical toxicity is essentially non-existent, unless, you're doing like maybe just so stupid of doses I can't vouch for, but for the most part, like, you don't see toxicity issues. They are not addictive. Mushrooms are kind of a bit of work. It's not like there are people that abuse them, but I think they're hard to abuse, because anytime you're on a mushroom trip, like, it's an all-day event, and then you're integrating. And if you're just doing microdoses, like, your microdoses aren't going to lead you into abuse, right? Like, nobody's dying from taking mushrooms. People are dying from alcohol. People are dying from tobacco. People are dying from pharmaceutical medications. The biggest contraindications or risk associated with mushrooms is psychological difficulties. And I don't think mushrooms are for everyone. I always found mushrooms to be kind of hard, like actual work. And I think some people won't appreciate that route or aren't ready for that route, because mushrooms can show you things that you're not ready to address. And if that happens, it puts you in a state of conflict. So some people do think that mushrooms are contraindicated for anxiety. And I believe that comes from the fact that anytime you're taking mushrooms, you are kind of riding the razor's edge between anxiety and excitement. Those are sister emotions. They're two sides of the same coin. Your anxiety and excitement almost feel the same. And if you don't take the intention, your setting's not right, you're not in the right headspace, like, you will ride the anxious side, and the mushrooms will magnify that anxiety for you. And if you're not ready to navigate that, and you don't have a good way to ground down from that, it can be very jarring. If you do have an awareness and you can kind of navigate that, I think they're great for anxiety. I use them as a highly anxious person who is very fearful going into using mushrooms as a microdose or even a macrodose. I think that the risk associated with microdosing is very low. Even for people on antidepressants like SSRIs, those are contraindicated. But I think the biggest risk there is that the SSRIs blunt the activity of the mushrooms. I really do think that the risk with microdosing is low. But I will just put in my cover my ass disclaimer, like, if you are on psychiatric medication, it's worth getting individualized support and following my mantra, go slow. You don't have to jump into full doses. You don't have to start off just all in. You can work your way up and tune in. If it's working, keep going. If it's not, stop. That's my method with herbs and supplements. And you'll stay safe, right? Like if you're good intentioned and you are paying attention, you will stay good. There's a lot of different microdosing protocols out there. I'm going to talk about two of the most popular ones, and then one that I do, and then one that I've been taught that I want to experiment more with. So when I first learned about microdosing years ago, there's two protocols that were super popular. There was the Fatimon protocol, which is every third day you are taking a microdose. This is slower, this is more conservative, you have more integration time between microdoses, and it's more economical if you are on a tight budget. So every 3 days, you take a microdose. And then there's the classic Stamets protocol. Stamets, Paul Stamets. Stamets is a big proponent of mushrooms. He's done a lot for the mushroom PR team, and he's got a big line of mushroom products you can find in grocery stores. He's responsible for Fantastic Fungi, if you've seen the documentary. His protocol is 5 days on, 2 days off. I've tried both of those. I've always just tended towards intuitively microdosing. So if I feel like I need it, I take it. And if I don't, I don't. And that's worked really well for me. And, maybe it's I'm going multiple days in a row. Maybe it's I'm going once a week. I took a microdose today. I think the last time I took a microdose was a couple weeks ago. And I'll go months without them, or sometimes I'll sprinkle them in just really as needed. I told you I'm to the point in my mushroom use journey where sometimes they're not welcome. I'm not welcome. So I refrain, and I can just kind of tune in and be like, is this a yes today or a no today? If you are doing the Fatimon or Stamets protocol, they talk about going 8 weeks on, so running the protocol for 8 weeks, and then taking 2 weeks off. Now, the person that taught me about microdosing recommend that every 2 weeks you macrodose. So 2 weeks, macrodose, and then you use the time between macrodoses to integrate following the Fatimon or the Stamets protocol. That's a lot. I think macrodosing every 2 weeks is too much. If I ever did mushrooms more than like once a month, it was a lot to process, because you see things, you feel things on mushroom trips that need to be integrated. And I've always liked a little bit more time between macrodoses. And that's another thing that I've always just done intuitively. Maybe I'd start feeling like, oh, I'm ready. I need a shift. I need to do some mushrooms soon. And then I would just be waiting for the right time within, a couple week time frame. I never was hell bent on like, I'm doing mushrooms tonight and I'm going to make that happen at whatever cost, because that's how you get into poor settings, and that's how you have bad trips when you take mushrooms when you're not actually in the right setting mentally to do it. So I've always really promoted a very intuitive approach to microdosing and to macrodosing, and it's worked really well for me. But I also think for people that are less tuned into their bodies, how they're feeling, that following one of these protocols can be very beneficial. I have no issues with either one, and I think it's worth experimenting with. And I want to mention that I recently took a clinical training from another herbalist who I have a lot of respect for, who uses mushrooms to get people off of SSRIs very regularly. And he believes you don't need days off. You take them like herbs. There's no reason to take days off. And that resonated with me. So if you are dealing with something acute, you are more in, I need to fix this mode, less like maintenance mode where I'm in, then, you take them every day and you're on until you don't need them anymore. So maybe you're taking them every day for 3 months and then you're putting them aside. I think that is very valid and worth some consideration as a protocol, especially for people coming off of um, things like their SSRIs. So I wanted to put that out there. I also will note that a lot of people believe that the microdoses should have lion's mane and niacin included. And I think this is a really interesting concept. So the niacin is to help distribute the psilocybin throughout the body. It's a carrier and it helps with vasodilation. So moving the mushrooms throughout so it can be used. And then the lion's mane enhances the cognitive functions. So lion's mane just makes it a little bit more potency in the way it lands. And I think it's a really cool concept. I have done microdoses with it and without it. I don't notice a big difference. I do think the amount of lion's mane and niacin in a capsule or microdose capsule usually ends up being a little negligible because you can only fit so much in there. But I don't think it'll hurt anything. So if you do microdoses without it, great. If you do microdoses with it, great. One of those things to kind of just play around with and experiment and see what calls or feels better to you. I personally, like I mentioned earlier, formulate my own microdoses. And this is new. So I created a formula, I don't know, 8 months ago, 9 months ago. It's been a while. And I use that with a couple clients, my partner. I mailed some to my mom, and I really like the formula. I think it hits better than any microdoses I've ever done. And I augmented the mushrooms with a bunch of Ayurvedic herbs. And it's interesting because comparing to microdoses that are bigger, like have more mushrooms in them. So like typical microdoses are about 125 milligrams. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. My microdoses have 80 milligrams of mushrooms and I feel like are more effective because of the augmented herbs in there. So I'm augmenting with licorice, trikatu, amla, vacha/calamus root, kapikachu, and bacopa. So I have licorice in as a universal harmonizer to bring the formula together. I have trikatu in there to be our carrier agent and to help with circulation and bioavailability. I also have amla in there as an acidic environment enhancer because mushrooms are better absorbed if there's an acid present. And then I have vacha and bacopa present because these are two Ayurvedic brain herbs that do so many things for the mind. I thought, let's see what happened. Bacopa is great for neuroplasticity, as are the mushrooms. The kapikachu is what I threw in to help make sure there are more good days on the microdoses than bad days. It has L-DOPA in it and helps with our serotonin. And when I take these microdoses, they can usually shift me out of a bad mood. They can shift me out of a pattern. I can take them. They are subperceptible, so I'm not tripping. And I feel like I take one of these microdoses and they last. Like I don't feel like I need to do it every day because I'm getting the benefits continually. So I've really enjoyed that formula. I'm planning on making another big old batch soon, sharing it. It's funny, I sent my mom some microdoses because, she's processing a lot and we had some major family and life events come up. And so I sent her a handful and like 3 months later, she still has them. And I'm like, are you even using them? She's like, yes, I'm microdosing the microdoses. So she'll take the microdoses I made, open them up and then like portion them out and use just like a half of the microdose in her coffee once a week. And that is doing it for her. That's helping her get unstuck. And she says it's sometimes uncomfortable because she has to confront and process emotions, but they are getting her unstuck, and that's been life-changing. I think that's pretty cool and just a good reminder that everybody's different, everybody's need is different, and everybody's going to perceive these things differently. So when we talk about a microdose and what is an actual quote-unquote microdose, a microdose is anywhere from 60 milligrams to 250 milligrams. And microdoses are supposed to be subperceptible. So the first time I microdosed, I was using 250 milligram microdoses. That's all I knew at the time. And some days they would knock me off my ass. Like there was days I had to call out of work because the microdose hit so hard. That's probably a day where I skipped breakfast and I was drinking coffee and that's why they hit so hard. But at that dose, it was a little more than subperceptible. And one day I got a batch from these people, and they were like so potent that those 250 milligrams were like having a bit of a trip. So I don't recommend that for everybody. I think that's the upper end of the dose range. But if somebody is really like not tuned in and not perceptive to these things, they might need a little bit more, and that's okay. This is do what works for you. For most people, I think the 125 milligram range is appropriate and a good place to start. And you could even start lower than that and working your way up to the 125 milligrams to make sure that you tolerate it and you're not going to have to call out of work or anything like that, because they should be subperceptible, which means you shouldn't be tripping, you shouldn't be hallucinating, you shouldn't be seeing things, the walls shouldn't be moving. What you might notice is some improvement in mood, or you might feel your emotions more. You might see things a little bit crisper and a little bit clearer. They will show you things, but it shouldn't be enough to disrupt your day. You should be able to take a microdose and go on with your work. You should be able to drive a car. You should be able to do all the things you would do in a day. I will say, though, that they really do kind of magnify what you're currently feeling. And for me, sometimes it can shift me out of a bad mood, but sometimes it can keep me, or like keep that bad mood magnified a little bit. Eventually it gets worked out and processed through. But if I'm feeling sadness, and that sadness probably needs to be felt, that mushroom might bring it to the surface and make me process it and confront it that day if I've been suppressing something. So know that if you're suppressing something and you start taking microdoses, like, you're going to be working through some things. You are going to be working through some shit. It's not always easy days, but they will make your days easier, if that makes any sense at all. I wanted to anchor us back, and this is going to be ironic because I totally spoke out against mushrooms being institutionalized earlier, but there is some really good information coming out in the studies about what mushrooms can do. So we know anecdotally what I told you, we know what people, my clients say, you know what your friends been saying, you know what you're reading on blogs and on the internet, but we have some studies that have come out that have showed what these mushrooms can do, even at microdoses, and it's pretty impressive. One of the biggest things that mushrooms are good for is that neuroplasticity. So that's your brain's ability to change and form new connections, to reorganize pathways and break entrenched patterns. So what happens, and this is the case of trauma, this is how our personalities are formed, this is how our worldview is created, is we are children. And sometimes we don't get what we need as children, or sometimes we do get what we need as children. All of it's formative. Everybody's personalities are formed before the age of 3 years old. And whatever your experience was from the time you were conceived to the time you're 3 years old is how you view the world. So if your diaper wasn't getting changed fast enough, that impacts you today. We have built these neural pathways about the way things should be done. We've created these habitual programmings inside of us, and they're not for the positive, right? Like, instead of being present in a moment and making a choice, most of us end up falling down one of these neural pathways that's already been created. The habits in, the worldviews in, the paradigms in, like, our subconscious already has a pathway for this event. And it's why we react to things the way we do. It's why we feel the way we do. It's why we hold certain opinions. But all of these things can be broken, and we can make new neural pathways. So, like, form new habits, form new paradigms, form new opinions, form new ways of looking at the world that we are choosing and weren't put on us when we were children. One of the ways to think about these neuroplasticity pieces is picture your brain as a ski slope covered in snow. And the depression we feel, the anxiety we feel, the trauma that we've experienced, think of things like PTSD, is a little skier that's been skiing down the mountain in the same exact spot, creating grooves and trenches. And these grooves and trenches get really, really deep. They get really, really deep in us, and it becomes our default to continually go down that path. Whether that's that repetitive thought loop, whether that's that habit that's not serving us, whether that's addiction, we keep falling down these grooves. And what mushrooms do is they bring in fresh snow, and they can cover up the grooves that we created. So new grooves are possible. We can take new routes instead of the ones that we've been continually taking. So think about like something little. Every single morning, you can't start your day off without coffee. Every day you get up, you drink coffee, you get up, you drink coffee, you get up, you drink coffee. And that groove gets entrenched and entrenched and entrenched. And that is your day. And you have to start your day like that. Maybe a part of you doesn't want to, but it's almost not a choice because it's habit. That pattern is engrooved. Mushrooms can help to shift you out of that pattern. And that pattern doesn't go for just trivial things like coffee. It goes for changes you're trying to make in your health, or the way you respond to people, or the way you respond to the world, or the way you feel moving through the world. Mushrooms can help reroute you. And at the end of the day, every piece of our health and well-being in this world comes back to awareness. And how are we feeling in this present moment? And if we are actioning and making decisions from the present moment, we are golden. But if we are making decisions from past experiences, past traumas, that anxiety, that depression, those grooves, if we aren't consciously choosing and we are just falling down one of these pathways every time an event in our life happens, then we are not in control and we get stuck. And that's when we don't feel good. Mushrooms can shift this. Mushrooms make new pathways possible, and it makes these new pathways possible to stick. And I can firsthand tell you that it's true. From changing our perspective to shifting habits and patterns and the way that we react to the world. I feel like that's the biggest one, is like the way that we react to the world. It absolutely can shift these things for us. It can help us create new paradigms from what we live in, right? Like our reality is what it is because that's what we think it is. And we can shift these things in a very powerful and profound way that increase quality of life. The research also shows that mushrooms, like we said, neuroplasticity, so they make the brain more flexible and fluid. They can get us less entrenched in negative thinking patterns like depression. It can quiet the default mode networks or the rumination loops. So again, think OCD, think ADHD, think anxiety. They've been shown to be potent anti-inflammatories that protect against inflammation-driven cognitive decline. I believe inflammation is a huge driver in dementia and Alzheimer's. So being able to quiet that inflammation in the brain is huge. They can help promote neurogenesis, which is neural growth, and it can prevent neuronal cell death. Lastly, it can boost cognitive function, focus, creativity, productivity, and memory. So I remember on one of my mushroom trips, whenever I think, my mind, it's like in front of me. Like if I shut my eyes and I'm in my brain, like my mind is right here and just in front of me, just right here, like under my forehead. But after taking mushrooms, my mind expanded. Like literally, we talk about drugs and things expanding our mind. Mushrooms expand my mind so I can think like all around me. Like my mind leaves the space right behind my forehead. This sounds cheesy, but I can like think in 360. I can like feel and think in a much grander, broader way. It helps my imagination, it helps my creativity, it helps me get what we call like downloads, right? Like just pieces of information coming to us. You know, I can think of like, oh, this just came to me. That's a piece of content I need to make. Oh, that came to me. I need to say that in my podcast. Oh, that came to me. I need to reach out to that person. Like it kind of like clears the field. Now, I want to say one thing that was very true for me when I started dabbling in psychedelics. I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid of being with myself and being in my mind space. And when you do psychedelics, there's a come up. And I always found the come up to be the hardest part because that's when our brain is decluttering. That's when we are processing unprocessed information. That's when, like, we're putting away all the files and we're cleaning up and everything's getting organized and we're dusting off the cobwebs. Like, all of these things are happening in the mind and we're rebooting everything. And I used to be afraid that I'd start looking around my mind and there would be things I don't want to see. There's thoughts I don't want to think. There's just, scary monsters in there. And as I started doing more mushrooms, I realized that, like, my mind is not scary. There's nothing in there to be afraid of. And I think mushrooms helped me, like, look under the rug and open the closet and look under the bed and really realize, like, there was nothing inside myself to be afraid of. There was nothing inside my mind to be afraid of. And sometimes I need some reorganizing, sometimes I need some clarity, sometimes I need, you know, to sweep and put the files away and just to kind of refresh my perspective on things. But at the end of the day, like, I'm a good person and there's nothing inside of my mind to be afraid of. And mushrooms help, like, shine the flashlight in the corners that we're afraid of and show us, like, there's nothing to be afraid of. And that doesn't mean there's not things to process. That doesn't mean that there's not traumas and PTSD related things that are real, because these things do happen and they have to be processed so they can move out of us and we can let go of them and we can stop reliving them. Mushrooms help to do that. They really do help to, like, just reboot and refresh everything in such a cool way. That does involve some confrontation with yourself, and it does involve really taking a look at your life. And if things aren't working or are out of alignment, mushrooms will show you that. If you're in a relationship that doesn't serve you, if you're in a job that doesn't serve you, mushrooms can bring that to the forefront, and then it's up to you to do something with it. Mushrooms won't do the work for you, and you have to be ready to make changes when you are engaging these substances. You have to be ready to confront them, or else you will continue living in conflict and it will not serve you. And that's when people have, I think, a bad time, and the mushrooms can make them more anxious. It's usually when we're not confronting something inside of ourselves, or we are not willing to do the work on something we know to be true. They're powerful. They're potent. They're very cool. I can't say enough great things about them, but I also want to just ground everybody in this space of understanding the landscape out there and being really conscientious of where you're getting your mushrooms, who you're getting your mushrooms from, and just on this greater collective level, knowing that the more institutionalized mushrooms become, the less they're going to work for what we need them to work for. Take all of that with what you will, take what resonates. I'm happy to answer any questions if anything comes up. I feel complete on this episode. I think I've said what I was called here to say. If you do have some personal questions, you think microdosing might be a fit for you, I'm happy to reach out. You're always welcome to schedule a consult with me. I do free consultations to see if the work I do is a fit for you. And if you are struggling with something like anxiety and depression, there's so many tools in the toolbox, mushrooms included, but also mushrooms aren't the only way there. And one last piece I want to throw in is, like, the pick when you get the message, put down the phone, right? Like, stop calling, stop using mushrooms, stop going to mushroom land. I really find that to be true because, like I said, mushrooms can take you to the top. They can show you what's possible, but they can't sustain you and they can't keep you there. And the goal of the game is to keep you there, to keep you in this place of peace and expansion and possibility. And I find that you can get there with meditation and other tools. And before I tried mushrooms, I tried meditation and I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't be with my thoughts. I didn't want to be alone. I needed constant stimulation so I was not alone with myself. And mushrooms were needed for me to move past these blockers. So now I can use meditation as that tool. I think every tool in the toolbox is meant to be picked up and put down. And I think eventually mushrooms can lead us to somewhere greater where we are sustaining our positive mental balance, our goodness in life, our sattvic nature for all of my yogis and Ayurvedic nerds out there. You can get there with so many other modalities. It doesn't have to be mushrooms, but for some people who are just really stuck in it, like I was stuck in it, mushrooms will shift you forward. All right. Don't forget that my school community is live. The Path to Practitioner Potency. I'd love to see you there. And if you're wondering if you're a fit, feel free to reach out. Link to sign up is below. There are still founding member seats. And if you are curious in one-on-one work or any of the other projects I have going, just check the description. I will keep you up to date. And I will see you next week. I have another episode request from a client of mine, and I have some fun experimental episodes coming back up. So stay tuned. I'm just so excited and in awe of the listenership I've already seen being so new, the feedback, the episode requests. I love it and I'm here for it all. So keep it up. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.